well, including from Switzerland, Australia, and Belgium. It's hard to keep track at the moment of all the parliamentarians that have signed in, but it's a truly international symposium. And today's symposium came out of the discussion that we've been having in a cross-party group of members of parliament that has been meeting regularly in the British Parliament. Because we in Britain have, I would say, a special responsibility to speak out, given that Julian Assange is held in a British high security prison, given that it is UK authorities that may extradite Julian Assange to the United States, where he faces 170 years in prison in a US super max prison. But we also believed that we need to make this a global cause of justice for parliamentarians across the globe, because this is, as you all know, a case that has huge global significance. Huge significance for extradition treaties all over the world between the United States and other countries, which are often so one-sided that they allow the US to effectively police what happens in countries across the world. But this case also has huge significance for the right of freedom of expression worldwide, because we should never forget that Julian Assange is being punished for no other reason than his journalistic work in exposure of war crimes, for providing a service to humanity, for lifting the lid on human rights abuses and war crimes done by the United States in Iraq, Afghanistan, Guantanamo Bay, and often done with the support of governments all across the world. So given the global nature of this case, we need to build a movement of parliamentarians across the world speaking out and calling on the Biden administration to drop the prosecution against Julian Assange. There have been some welcome shifts by the Biden administration away from the era of Trump on issues such as climate change, and we need to ensure that there is a shift on this issue too. So today, we've got 3 sessions. This first session is one in which we will listen to 2 very important guests who will update us on this case. The first guest is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, and then we will hear from Stella Moris, Julian Assange's partner. In the second session, we will hear from parliamentarians from across the world, including from Australia, and I encourage parliamentarians from each country represented here today to speak in that second session. And then finally, we will look at the next steps that politicians can be taking, with opening remarks from the former Nobel Prize winner, Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, and the German Member of Parliament, Sevim Dagdelen. And we'll be wrapping up by 3 p.m. London time. So with those introductory remarks over, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, Nils.
Thank you very much, Richard. Is the audio okay? Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for having me for this, giving me the opportunity to speak to this important audience. I think you formulated it really correctly, that this is an extremely important issue that is of great importance far beyond the person of Julian Assange. I think this case has, although obviously every case like this has a personal aspect, and I'm sure that also Stella Moris afterwards will speak to that as well. But I think we all have to be to try to focus on the overall importance of this case. Myself, I was contacted by Julian Assange's lawyers in December 2018. He was still at the Ecuadorian embassy, and they asked me to intervene on his behalf and said that his living conditions at the embassy amounted to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. And I had this visceral reaction of, I'm not going to be manipulated by this narcissist and rapist and hacker and so on. And to my shame, I didn't know anything about this case, but somehow I emotionally felt I knew everything about Julian Assange. And I'm telling you this because it led me to not get engaged in the case for 3 months until his lawyers came back and said, we have rumors that his expulsion from the embassy is imminent. Could you please look into the case? And they sent me some medical expertise and opinions of independent medical experts that had visited him and some other materials. And only once I started to look in those pieces of evidence, I realized that there really wasn't any facts to back up this narrative that I had in my own mind. So I'm telling you all of this because I think that's the most important obstacle to having a clear 2020 vision, even before 2021 this year, on this case, is that we're always looking at Julian Assange, and because most of us don't know him personally, we're looking at a persona that has been created of him or for him or in his place, mainly in various media platforms and so on over the last 10 years. And I can assure you, I've investigated this case for 2 years, there is nothing to back up this narrative. So I obviously I could speak here in very much detail to all aspects of the investigation, but I propose that I will then answer to questions if people want to know more specifically about specific aspects. But I'd like to focus on the state side of this, because we're talking about a prosecution, and when someone is being prosecuted, we always look at the person. We're not looking at the prosecuting side. And I'm arguing that what's being done here is a prosecution that is not pursuing law and justice, but is pursuing political purposes. And therefore it is a persecution, it is not a prosecution. And all of this hinges on the good faith of the prosecuting states. And here I'm talking not only about the US, I'm also speaking of the UK, I'm speaking of Sweden, I'm speaking of Ecuador. And in all of those 4 cases, states, in every single proceeding that had been led against Julian Assange or involving him, his procedural rights, I can assert that as an international lawyer, have been systematically violated in each stage of each proceeding in each jurisdiction. And we're talking about a person, as we know, who's exposed evidence for war crimes. None of these crimes has ever been prosecuted. Already that disproves the good faith of those authorities, because clearly those war crimes are much more serious than what Julian Assange could ever conceivably have been committed. None of this is being prosecuted, but he is being persecuted. He's not even a whistleblower who's had a duty of allegiance or of secrecy. He's a publicist, a journalist who has published evidence for serious crimes. Now, we can see, as I said, in the Swedish proceedings, clear violations of his procedural rights. I can speak to that in detail if you'd like. Ecuador has expelled him from the embassy without any due process, has taken his statehood away, his citizenship away without any due process. In the UK proceeding, unfortunately, to my shock, and I'm a professor at the British University myself,
not Iraqi Democrat,
I could see how his rights have been systematically violated. In the US, Julian Assange would not expect a fair trial either. The good faith of those states is also disproven by the way in which they engaged with my mandate. I'm mandated by states to report to states about their compliance with their obligations under the Convention Against Torture. And when I reported to those 4 states that I had identified serious violations of human rights law in this case, and that I asked for an investigation and for them to cooperate with my investigation, they refused to engage in a constructive dialogue altogether. And even my follow-up letters, my reports to the General Assembly in New York, my reports to the Human Rights Council in Geneva, nothing was able to achieve a conduct by these states that would have been compliant with their human rights obligations. I'm not saying that they needed necessarily to agree with my findings that Julian Assange had been exposed to psychological torture, but by treaty law, they're obliged to conduct a prompt and impartial investigation under the Convention Against Torture as soon as they have reasonable evidence to believe that the act of torture could have been committed. And for that, it is sufficient that my mandate transmits those allegations. I didn't take those allegations somewhere from the press or obscure sources. I actually wanted to avoid any kind of politicization and went to visit Julian Assange in prison in May 2019, just after his arrest, together with two very experienced experts, medical experts, specialized in examining victims of torture. And they have worked in this for about 30 years. They have examined victims in the Balkan Wars and the Middle East. I mean, they have no reason to seek publicity. You will have noticed in the last 2 years, they have never appeared in the press. So they're not, scandal-seeking kind of people. They're very experienced, independent medical experts. Both of them and myself, we all came to the conclusion that Julian Assange showed the symptoms that are typical for victims of psychological torture. And here we're talking about ill treatment that is comparable to a type of mobbing that we would know from our private lives, or that everyone would be familiar with. It's a very common method of psychological torture because it doesn't leave physical traces, but is extremely destructive to the human mind and emotional stability in the long term. And it has several components. It always includes a form of isolation, social isolation or physical isolation. In Julian Assange's case, we progressively have both of those aspects. Then there is a threat scenario that is there, that something bad could happen at any moment. And here we have the extradition to the US. And I mean, all human rights organizations agree that the conditions of detention for political detainees, or let's say national security detainees in the US, amount to inhumane and cruel treatment. And so we have the isolation, we have the threat scenario, we have the constant arbitrariness of official behavior. And here we're talking to his constant violations of his procedural rights. He doesn't get access to his lawyers. He doesn't get access to his very basic rights as a defendant, just to prepare his defense. He doesn't get access to his legal files. And so on top of this, we have this campaign of defamation, where he is constantly being humiliated and ridiculed, but he can't answer to those accusations in a way that protects his human rights. All of these elements you will find in a mobbing context. And we know that mobbing can lead people to commit suicide. It's a very serious form of abuse, although it doesn't leave immediate physical traces. So all of this I reported to those states, and it has been confirmed by other independent medical doctors. We've had hundreds of doctors intervening internationally with the British government. We've had the European Parliament passing resolutions. We've had the International Bar Association protesting officially against the unfair trial that Julian Assange is getting. We've had Amnesty International speaking out against his extradition. Even New York Times, The Guardian, who have been critical to some aspects of WikiLeaks' work in the past, have very clearly spoken out against the unjust treatment of Julian Assange. The Working Group on Arbitrary Detention of the United Nations years ago has decided that his confinement in the embassy is arbitrary. I have investigated this case. I have no personal stakes in this case. And I was even biased, I admit it, to my shame, biased against Julian Assange in the beginning. But once I looked at the fact, it was clear that this is not a prosecution, it is a persecution. Now, let us not, and I will close on this last aspect, let us not be misled by the seemingly positive result of the judgment of 4th of January, which refuses extradition based on medical grounds. It's a slightly, or even a strongly misleading judgment, because first, the judgment goes all the way to confirm the US indictment for espionage, which basically sets a precedent case that what Julian Assange has done, which is investigative journalism, is a crime under the Espionage Act. And not only that, but also under the British Official Secrets Act. So it also really concerns every single British citizen. They could be criminalized for exposing dirty secrets, if you allow me that term, of the government. And so they confirmed that narrative. They contrary to the will of British Parliament, the judge said that the exception for political offenses, so the prohibition of extradition for political offenses, did not apply, although it is expressly in the treaty between the UK and the US. And so they confirmed this whole precedent case, and in the end didn't extradite him, not yet at least, for medical reasons, because the prison conditions in the US would be oppressive in view of the mental health of Julian Assange. Now that's a little bit of a trap, because in the appeals case now, obviously the only question the US will appeal is that precise question on whether their conditions of detention are inhumane and whether they're acceptable to Julian Assange. And so now here they can make diplomatic assurances with regard to those conditions and thereby remove that obstacle fairly easily. And the whole appeals proceeding has now been reduced to that discussion. We're no longer discussing political offense. We're no longer discussing press freedom. We're no longer discussing war crimes. We're only discussing those assurances, and they can easily be given by the US. And afterwards, as we know, those assurances are not always respected in practice. So I think it's more of a maneuver to reduce and focus the appeals proceeding to something that's beneficial to the US than that this is really about an expression of consideration of humanity on behalf of Julian Assange. And I can even prove that with a final point. If the judge considers that solitary confinement in the US is inhumane and oppressive and would lead Julian Assange to commit suicide, then why does she send Julian Assange back to solitary confinement in the UK, where there is no need and no legal basis to keep him in solitary confinement? He's not serving a sentence. He is only being kept there in confinement to assure his presence in case he should be extradited. So it's a preventative detention so he doesn't escape. But you don't need solitary confinement in Belmarsh for that, where lawyers don't have access, family doesn't have access, where he can't exercise his profession. He should be now in a house arrest context, such as has been given to Augusto Pinochet. When he was in extradition detention, he was held in a villa in house arrest and had all other liberties, save for he couldn't leave the UK. And that's the only legitimate purpose for restricting Julian Assange's purpose, if ever we should consider that extradition proceeding legitimate in the first place. But if we do that, then he could at the most be lawfully kept in house arrest. So the fact that he's being kept in an expensive solitary confinement arrangement in Belmarsh proves that the authorities have other things in mind than just assure his presence for that trial. So I think with this, I have exhausted my initial speaking time. I thank you very much for your attention. Clearly, I'm free to and willing to respond to any questions anyone might have. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Nils, and we'll come on to questions after our next speaker. But I want to say that we've been joined since the start also by representatives from Argentina, from Belgium, and from Ireland and Norway as well. And in fact, we've had over 40 international guests registered for today's event. And I think that just goes to show the strength of feeling from parliamentarians across the globe on this crucial issue. And on that note, I'd like to invite Stella to address the meeting.
Hi, Richard. Thank you. Last Sunday was the 2-year anniversary of Julian's arrest and incarceration in Belmarsh. And there were protests and vigils on 5 continents and the story was in the major UK newspapers. A double-decker bus was filled with people and draped with Free Assange. And it followed the path from Julian's arrest at the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison, where Julian has been buried from public view for the past 2 years. If it weren't for Julian's calls with me and a limited number of people, he would have no idea what was going on, not only around the world, but just 50 yards from the cell that holds him. This is what a prison like Belmarsh is for, to seal you off, to make you feel that you are alone and forgotten to the world. Julian spends most of the hours of the day alone, When we speak, it's only 10 minutes at a time. Imagine being forced to communicate with your loved one in this way. Imagine having to explain to our children, Max, who's 2, and Gabriel, who's 3, why Daddy was speaking to them 1 second and then disappeared the next. Imagine telling them that their father wants to come home, but they won't let him yet. I don't know how to describe what I have had to witness. Terms such as monumental injustice, aberration come to mind. And I think of alluding to basic democratic principles and human rights. But all these are words that ultimately feel stale and abstract. I have not yet found the words for what we are going through. Julian is the most considerate, principled, and generous person I know. And what is being done to him is cruelty in its rawest form. Julian has spent 2 years in a high security prison. The Obama administration decided not to charge Julian because Julian's conduct was no different to that of the rest of the press. Charging Julian would mean criminalizing journalism. Obama pardoned the alleged source, Chelsea Manning, who was free. The charges brought by Mike Pompeo and the Trump administration do just that. They criminalize journalism. To date, Julian has suffered severe punishment through process, surrounded by the worst murderers and drug dealers in Britain. He's in a prison where prisoners are killed through murder or suicide every few months. He faces 175 years, or however many life sentences, if you want to quantify. All this for publishing information of the highest political and historical interest. On the 4th of January, the lowest court in this country, the UK, blocked the extradition because the judge concluded that extraditing Julian to the brutal and inhumane treatment he would receive would inevitably kill him. The DOJ is appealing, and the High Court will decide in the coming weeks if and when the appeal is heard. A reversal of the decision to block extradition would mean a death sentence for Julian. This case should be understood with the urgency and importance of a capital case. The US government says it has the prerogative to decide what foreign press can publish about its abuses committed abroad. It is extending its criminal laws to the rest of the world to prosecute a publisher who has won the highest awards for journalism for doing his job, an Australian living and working in London, Paris, and Berlin for a Europe-based publishing organization, a card-holding member of his press union whose allegiance is to the public. Let's pause and think about what the US case against Julian is actually saying. The US government is claiming that journalists all over the world have no freedom of expression rights and protections because they are not US citizens, that US criminal laws apply to them, but the First Amendment does not, even when they are in their own countries. If everything else was the same, if Julian was in London working for WikiLeaks, but he had an American passport, then he might have a defense. But because of the single fact that he does not have an American passport, he doesn't. If the case would have been brought by any other country, it would have been immediately thrown out and publicly ridiculed. The case against Julian is the ultimate realization of Trump's America First policy. It has added an aggressive new dimension to American exceptionalism that removes our rights as non-Americans in our own countries and infringes our sovereignty. Reporters Without Borders and the National Union of Journalists in the UK have said that as long as Julian is in prison and faces extradition, the UK is not a safe place for journalists and publishers to work. The Trump administration advanced this perversion, and other countries will inevitably follow, leading to a global race to the bottom for freedom of expression. The effect of this extraterritorial discriminatory intrusion is to erode freedoms globally. So the far-reaching consequences of this case cannot be overstated. At the same time, the case is an embarrassment to all the governments involved. It is obvious to everyone that the UK and the US cannot advance their human rights and press freedom foreign policy agendas effectively with Julian in prison. Across the world, the detention of Julian is causing real harm right now, not just to him, but to human rights defenders everywhere, because the principle of press freedom is being hollowed out by its loudest proponents. For human rights abusers who are criticized by the West for incarcerating journalists, political dissidents, and human rights defenders, their answer is simple, immediate, and devastating. What about Assange? From Amnesty to the OSCE to the Council of Europe and the UN, the voices clamoring for Julian's release are strong and mutually reinforcing. They must grow louder and louder until there is nowhere for the UK, US, and Australian governments to turn. Those governments must constantly crash into this case, just like Saudi Arabia does with the Khashoggi assassination. It is too late for Khashoggi, but it is not too late for Julian. As lawmakers, you have unique avenues and powers at your disposal to press for Julian's release and call for an end to his persecution. I'd like to thank Richard Burgon for organizing the symposium, the cross-parliamentary groups in Australia, Germany, and the UK for the work they have already done to put an end to this, and to each of you individually and collectively for stepping up to save Julian's life and our collective freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stella. Now we have 15 or 20 minutes for questions to Nils and to Stella. If people would like to speak, if they could indicate by using the raised hand function, and then I can see it in the participants list. And the first person who's indicated is John McDonnell, MP.
Thanks, Richard. Our brothers and sisters on this call will see there's a range of Labour MPs from the UK Parliament here, Jeremy Corbyn, Claudia Webb and Apsana Begum, as well as Richard and myself. And it's an indication of the absolute concern that there is on a cross-party basis, even within our own Parliament, about the situation that that Julian finds himself in. I'm the secretary of the National Union of Journalists Parliamentary Group, and we've made it clear that Julian's case is, well, it basically means if we can't win this case, if we can't secure his release, his freedom, no journalist is safe anywhere. Absolutely. I visited Julian Assange in Belmarsh. I think I'm the only UK MP that was able to do so. And I just wanted to put to Stella and Nils, really, because they've experienced this as well. I find it deeply ironic that on this case, the court has ruled that if Julian is extradited to America, within the American system, he will be unsafe and it'll be a threat to his life. I think I should explain to our brothers and sisters from elsewhere what Belmarsh is about. I've visited Belmarsh to visit constituents even and others. Belmarsh is a high security regime. In those high security regimes, there's always a high level of violence. In addition to that, there's also a high level of self-harm and suicide. When I visited Julian that month, there had been a suicide already on his wing. And it is because of the brutality of the regime itself. And this is not about the prison officers themselves. This is not about their behavior. This is about the nature of the regime itself, which is deliberately isolating and humiliating. And it's a regime in which many people live in a climate where there's given the sense of no hope. And that's why there's such a high level of self-harm, suicide, but also violence as well. we have to now, obviously, on the basis of the arguments that are put forward, obviously what we've got to do is rebuff any of the appeals that are coming from the US administration to overturn at least this judgment. But it is about creating a climate of opinion which secures, not just prevents Julian from being extradited to the US, but actually does secure his release. Because I fear for his safety in Belmarsh. When I met him, I was incredibly impressed at the way in which he was holding himself. But it's tough. It's a tough regime, and I don't think many people survive in that regime for a long period without severely damaging effects or survive at all. So all our efforts now, it's almost a sense of urgency after 2 years of trying to secure his freedom. So my question is, where do we go from here? With Nils and Stella, really, I think it is about what we can do in terms of the pressure, the international pressure we can bring to bear on the Biden regime. Of course, with Trump, there was no hope, but with the Biden regime and those within the Biden administration, it gives us an element of hope. And it just what mechanisms are best to now be used, and whether or not we've obviously been restricted with regard to physical meetings because of the COVID pandemic, but somehow whether or not now it's worth organizing delegations to meet with either online or physically, if possible, with representatives of the Biden regime to demonstrate to them what scale of international pressure and concern that there is on this. And I just think now there has to be a sense of urgency of pressurizing that new administration to give Julian hope of this case being dropped altogether so that we can secure his release. I fear that, exactly as Nils has said, that assurances might come from America that will then persuade a UK court then to allow the extradition to take place. I think Nils is right. That's one route that we've got to guard against. And the best way of doing that, I think, is to strike at the source of this whole case, which is now in the US and in the hands of Biden himself. I'd welcome people's views about how we go about that.
Thanks very much, John. And we've got Janet Rice from Australia, who would like to speak.
Hello, everyone. And look, thank you so much for bringing us all together. It's been so powerful so far, so distressing as well. And particularly thanks to Nils and to Stella for your opening remarks, which just really put it so succinctly as to what an appalling situation that Julian's in. I'm the Greens Foreign Affairs spokesperson here in Australia. Also on this call, we've got Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, who's been very active on the campaign to support Julian, and former Senator Scott Dagdelen. And in Australia, we've got quite an active parliamentary friends group, which has got cross-party support, but there is not support for strong action in support of Julian from either our government or the opposition, the Labor Party, although there are members of the government and members of the Labor Party who are supportive. What I wanted to ask was to just reflect on what difference it would make if there was strong support for Julian as an Australian citizen. I mean, I find it absolutely astounding and appalling that the Australian government is just leaving him and just abandoning him as an Australian citizen. And so I want to know, I mean, I have asked numerous questions of our foreign minister about why we have not seen stronger support from the Australian government and have got very unsatisfactory responses. But I'd just like you to reflect on what difference would it make if that changed and if we had an Australian government that was both advocating strongly on behalf of Julian, both to the UK government and to the US government in particular.
And on that note, Peter Whish-Wilson has got his hand raised as well.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Stella and Nils, for your fantastic speeches. Could I just ask quickly, have we heard whether the US administration has put in their substantive case for the extradition appeal? Because it's still unclear to us here in Australia what the Biden administration or Merrick Garland's stance is on the extradition. It'd just be good to know if there's any update on that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And so I want to hand over to Nils and to Stella to respond to those points made. Thanks very much.
Maybe I should just.
Yeah, you go first. Go first.
In relation to the Biden administration, well, the Trump administration 2 days before leaving office lodged their appeal and kind of locked the incoming administration into the appeal. They could have waited and just left it to them, but they didn't. And they did that with various other things like the Houthis and so on. So the Biden administration has lodged its substantive reasons for appeal, but I don't necessarily read very much into that. The strongest indication is that the outgoing lead prosecutor of the case against Julian, Zachary Telwinger, or something similar, gave an interview with National Public Radio in the US because he was leaving his post and going into private practice. And the interview was just the day after Julian had won the case against the US government. And his comments was that the Biden administration would have to look at this case afresh because it was a question of resources and where you want to put your efforts. And he was indicating that there wasn't really a very strong appetite to pursue this case, and that there's controversy within the US government about pursuing this case. And there's no surprise there because the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the press freedom organizations in the US who have analyzed this case understand and have expressed that this is the single greatest threat to the First Amendment and press freedom in the US of the past 100 years, or at least the past 40. And I know you're going to hear from the lawyer for the New York Times in the Pentagon paper case, James Goodall, later on today, and he can speak to just how outrageous and dangerous and this case is. And so the Biden administration is under pressure internally in relation to this case, because you have to remember Julian is not a whistleblower. Sometimes he is described as such, from what I see, but he's not the source. He is the person who receives and disseminates the information to the public, and that is a publisher. And that means that the case that is taken against him sets a precedent not for whistleblowers, but for publishers. And I think there has to be a shift in approach of understanding that difference, because it is the conduct that is alleged against Julian that is described as a crime. They're not going after Julian Assange because he's Julian Assange. They're going after the conduct of publishing information, even though they admit it is information in the public interest. If you break down the charges, and I'll try not to extend too much, but if you break down the charges, there's 140 years just have to do with receiving and possessing information that the US doesn't want, says it hasn't authorized for a publisher to receive and possess. Where does it leave publishers? Not just in the US. This is a foreign publisher publishing. He wasn't breaking any laws in the UK. He was carrying out protected activity, press activity in the UK, and the US is reaching in across the borders and saying and curtailing press freedoms in the UK and saying that these are criminal activities and that they have the ability to reach into these borders and pluck Julian out and criminalize and put him in prison.
Richard, can I take the floor quickly?
Yes, of course, please do.
Okay. Thank you. I fully agree with what Stella just said. What I want to add to this is perhaps there was this question of would it make a difference if in Australia perhaps the population were more active in campaigning. I think in order to understand what would be effective here, we have to understand the bigger mechanics of this. And what, as Stella said, it is about suppressing the truth, if you allow me to simplify it that way. This is what this is about. It's that the United States, but also its allies, this includes the UK, it includes Sweden, but it also includes Germany and others. None of those governments is interested in having someone like Julian Assange, who's promoting transparency, just roaming around and publishing their secrets. And although that's what press freedom is about, because it is the fourth estate and it's actually overseeing correct behavior of governments. But we have to realize that the Australian government is very deeply in bed, if you allow me to say, with the secret services in the US and the UK and Sweden and all the Western secret services or intelligence services. They're cooperating very closely. Now, that's not a conspiracy. It's just their operating modalities after 9/11. And they, I'm sure they're genuinely convinced that they're fighting terrorism and so on, but they have what has evolved in the last 20 years. And I can really say that because I've worked for all those 20 years in that precise area. What has developed is kind of a subculture, a parallel universe of intelligence services that keep very important information secret and that suppress evidence for ill treatment and other international crimes, and that prevent democratic societies from actually exercising their democratic control. This is how the Espionage Act and how the Official Secrets Act are being abused, what they're being abused for. And this is what this case is trying to establish, a basis to be able to use those pieces of legislation in order to suppress the truth, to prevent democratic societies from actually exercising their control and holding the authorities accountable. Now, if you don't believe me, just look at the facts. None of the war crimes that have been proven have been prosecuted. If those states were in good faith, they would never behave like that. So this is what this is about. They don't want to prosecute their misconduct, and so they persecute the person that exposes them. If we understand that this is the big mechanics, then it is logical that the governments don't support Julian Assange, but it is not in the interest of their own populations. It's because they're too closely intertwined without any accountability with foreign intelligence services. And so I think it is very important that the public becomes more aware of how things really work in practice and that they start demanding accountability from their governments. And I think parliamentarians are absolutely key here, because you're the ones that are passing the laws. You are the ones who are in direct contact with your constituencies. You can trigger those dialogues, and it's not just about prosecuting bad guys. It's about changing this or ensuring that our system remains transparent, and where it's no longer transparent, it becomes transparent and accountable again. And so this is what this is really about. So I think it's absolutely, yes, it's crucial that parliamentarians have this dialogue, and that they also engage the population and show the population, their various constituencies, why this is so important in practice, because the governments really are too close to the ball, and they are on a daily basis cooperating with other intelligence services, and they're basically paralyzed. And this is exactly what you see, how they respond to those questions from parliamentarians, how the governments in Germany or in Australia or elsewhere, how they respond to those questions. it's very evasive. They always, it's some form of platitudes that they tell you, but oh, this is about the rule of law and we can't interfere with an ongoing proceeding and so on. But when it's about Navalny in Russia, they can very well interfere with an ongoing proceeding. So, and I'm not, I agree that Navalny's rights are being violated, but he is being detained for a bail violation. And that's why everybody imposes sanctions on Russia. But no one imposes sanction on the UK for detaining Julian Assange because of a bail violation, which is not really a bail violation because he received official asylum by a UN member state. And let me just close on this remark. Judge Beretzer, who actually refused Julian Assange's extradition on the 4th of January based on medical grounds, and because she said that the US conditions of detention would be oppressive, she confirmed that Julian Assange was right in seeking asylum in Ecuador. She didn't say that, but he sought asylum in Ecuador, in the embassy, because he was afraid of being extradited to inhumane detention conditions. So he was right to ask for guarantees from Sweden, to ask for guarantees from the UK that they would not extradite him to the US. And he always offered that he would come out of the embassy if that were given. But both states refused to do that. And now even the magistrate courts confirmed that he was right, in essence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nils. Thank you so much, Stella. And thanks to everyone who took part in this opening session. And it gives me great pleasure to hand over to chair the second session today to Apsana Begum, an inspirational new member of Parliament from the British Parliament. And this session that Apsana's chairing will be updates from activities in different countries in support of Julian Assange. So, Apsana.
Thank you so much, Richard, and welcome to anybody that's just joined on the call today. As Richard mentioned, I'm a member of Parliament in the UK Parliament, and I represent Poplar and Limehouse in East London, where actually 10 years ago, Julian actually attended and delivered a couple of talks, actually, and I attended as a young student a few years back. In this session, we have just under 1 hour to share with one another what's happening in parliamentary campaigns and campaigns beyond Parliament in different countries around the world. And indeed, if there are any sort of updates that can be shared that may benefit us all in understanding what we can do all together to move forward on this case and free him. I know there are some speakers who've already been in touch to indicate that they wish to speak, and I will draw upon them, but also others who may wish to speak. If you just use the Zoom function, raising hand function to raise your hand, and I will draw you in. But I will request if you can keep your contributions to 4 to 5 minutes, and I'll leave a 1-minute warning in the Zoom chat function as well to let you know that there are others that wish to speak as well. And just to remind anybody that's just joined as well, the organisers of the symposium have ensured that there is French and Spanish translation available that can be accessed through the interpretation button on the function bar at the bottom of the screen. So I think it'd be good if we start off just to maybe say a little bit more about the UK and sort of maybe the work that's been done by parliamentarians in the UK in relation to sort of building up support in relation to other countries. And so I want to sort of firstly asked to speak the former leader of the UK Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who I believe is on the call. So Jeremy, if you can unmute yourself and maybe you can bring us to speed a little bit more about the work that you've been doing and others have been doing in the UK Parliament, that'd be great.
Thanks, Apsana. Jeremy, first of all, thank you for everyone being on the call, and thank you for the sense of solidarity that there is around the world for Julian. I have to say, I ask myself a question all the time, why it is that the British media hardly report the situation at all, like it's almost a non-story in most of the British press, whereas it is a very big story in other parts of the world, including in the USA, which I find very, very strange indeed. The campaign for
to prevent Julian being removed to the USA. The extradition request is a very important and very strong one. And Richard Burgon and others have constantly done their best to raise it in Parliament in different ways. And Diane Abbott, who, as the former Shadow Home Secretary, made it clear that her support for Julian, and I think Stella's point that Julian is a publisher more than anything else that is being threatened with deportation for or extradition for is a very important point to make, because it's easy language to say, and indeed I'm probably fallen into it myself on occasions, that he's a whistleblower like others. It's a slightly different situation. But I do think that the emphasis has to be that if sent to the USA, he would get a indeterminate sentence, would never be out in the rest of his life, and his medical condition would be exacerbated by being there. And that secondly, his rights in Britain are very limited, because he should not be in maximum security prison in Belmarsh. He should not be in prison at all. And if the British government simply said, we are not prepared to extradite him because of the view taken by the court, then I think it would be a very different set of circumstances, and they could then persuade the US to withdraw it. Now, I think the need for a global parliamentary campaign on this is very important. Today is part of that. Could we try and use the Interparliamentary Union on this? I'm a member of the British branch of the Interparliamentary Union, as I would imagine my colleagues are. Can we also try and use the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association on this? Because Australia is obviously a member of the Commonwealth. And is there any circumstance in which we can get this brought up at a session of the UN Human Rights Council when it next meets? Because it seems to me that we just have to raise the stakes a lot more on this. The disposal of the questioning by Norway on this, Sweden on this, over Julian has certainly helped the campaign quite a lot, because that, while that issue was overhanging, it made it often very difficult to persuade parliamentary colleagues to be involved in the Julian case. But since that is now gone, and it is clearly a case of the right of a journalist to be able to disseminate information, and it is the right of a publisher to be able to publish it, that is central to this. And as Stella and Nils both said, if this was happening in anywhere else in the world, just imagine the way the media would deal with it. A publisher is wrongly imprisoned in China at the present time, and a great deal of the world's media focuses attention on that. The same would happen if it were Russia. The same would happen if it were many other countries. And so what I think we demand is, excuse me, I've just come back from speaking at a housing demonstration. What we have to demand is, one, an effective link of parliamentarians all around the world on this. Secondly, a lot of pressure on the British media to take the issue up much more seriously. Therefore, popular events outside the prison are important, popular demonstrations are important, popular demands are important, and getting well-known personalities to support is important. And thirdly, let's use the international institutions that we've got access to as a way of demanding his safety and his security. Question for any of the lawyers on, is there any further mileage in trying to take the issue to the European Court of Human Rights in respect of breaches of the European Convention of Human Rights on the right of free speech, which clearly is fundamental to this issue? But can I just finish by saying thank you very much, Apsana, for this, and also for your brilliant work in Parliament and the amazing speech that you made this week. It will go down in parliamentary history as an incredible major contribution to our own democratic demands. So, Apsana, thank you very much, and congratulations again on that speech.
Well, thanks so much, Jeremy, for those kind words. And as ever, you've inspired me and many others in our generation to come forward. And we thank you for the work that you've done over decades for people all around the world who deserve human rights. It's really important what you said there, I think, and I think will be picked up in the next session as well, about the IPU, the CPA, and the United Nations Security Council and other international forums and bases which really should provide, I think, I agree with you, a springboard to really build up the global campaign to free Julian. And as well as, I think, well-known personalities as well. I think that is important. The more that we see them using their platforms to come forward as well, and I think we can do to push that as well, I think is really key. So thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to go now over to France. I believe she is speaking from France, so I feel like we're traveling internationally. Danielle Obono from the French Parliament. I know she will have to leave shortly after, so over to you, Danielle, and welcome.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the campaign and Andrew and Apsana for inviting us. I'm Danielle Obono from the French Parliament, a member of the group La France Insoumise. And I'm also representing our president, the president of our parliamentary group, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who couldn't be here with us because he's actually meeting fellow parliamentarian in Ecuador and in Latin America, and it was a bit complicated to connect with us, but he is with us in spirit, because he's been one of the leading political figure in France, advocating on behalf of Julian Assange. He went to see him in London in 2012 at the video conference in 2013, and he's been asking since 2019 for political asylum to be granted to Julian Assange in France. At the time, which is interesting, is that the Minister of Justice, our now Minister of Justice, Éric Dupond-Moretti, made the same request. He's been one of the lawyers who's been advocating for Julian Assange, and now being the Justice Minister, we're still calling him for supporting this demand. So here's what Jean-Luc Mélenchon wanted to share with you about the important movement we're building and the important case we're discussing. Julian Assange is a freedom fighter. Thanks to him, many war crimes committed by the US military around the world have come to light. He also rendered a great service to our country by showing how all French leaders were systematically spied on by our so-called ally, the United States. This was notably the case for Presidents Chirac, Sarkozy, and Hollande, who were wiretapped by the NSA. Since 2010, Julian Assange has been hunted down by the American empire. He spent 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy in London in a 9-square-meter room. For a year and a half, he's been languishing in an English prison. I've long called for France to grant political asylum to Julian Assange. On April 11, 2019, when the current Ecuadorian president decided to hand him over to the British police, I again formally made this request. The Justice Minister, when he was one of Assange's lawyers, also actively campaigned for our country to grant asylum to the London recluse. I hope he has not forgotten this fair fight now that he's a minister. I therefore address once again solemnly to Emmanuel Macron, grant asylum to Julian Assange. France must not abandon those who help it to be free and independent. I have to add that we keep on putting the pressure on our government, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon, as well as Mathilde Panot, who is the vice president of our parliamentary group, also nominated journalist Julian Assange for the Nobel Prize, as it's our prerogative of parliamentarian. and then to have pressure on the French government to be more active, to speak out actually on this issue. We can't call ourselves the nation of freedoms and be so silent and being complicit in what is being done to one of, as we said, one of the world's freedom fighter in those days. I think there's also some more pressure to put on the people in the media, in the press here in France, who've been not very courageous also in fighting back, especially knowing the consequences, and it's been very eloquently explained before how this will not only what is being done to Julian Assange as a person is absolutely revolting, but what the meaning and the political meaning of what is being done is an attack on freedom, of press freedom, and of all of people seeking speaking truth to power by showing what our government are doing on our names. And I think it's very important also for the media to be, especially in France, to be more outspoken about that. So we'll keep doing this work in France, and thank you very much for allowing us to be part of this moment. And of course, we will support all the initiatives that you talk about and you decide to launch in order to win this fight for Julian Assange, but also for our freedoms and our democracy. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Danielle. And I think there's so much there as well that I think we've got to take forward there in terms of working together collectively, particularly here, I know, in the UK, and solidarity to you and your leader and your party for everything that you're doing, because I know even from just across the pond over here, I feel the strength of the struggle and the fight that you're currently facing in terms of the freedoms and rights in France as well. So thank you, Danielle. And I'm going to now go over to, I can see that Yanis has joined us, Yanis Varoufakis from Greece. So if I come to you, Yanis, and draw upon you to let us know what's happening where you are and your thoughts on what we can do and what work you're doing to take the campaign forward as well.
Well, thank you very much. What's happening here in Greece is what's happening everywhere. We have a deepening techno-feudal oligarchy, which is relying extensively on ensuring that parliamentarians, as well as the public, are kept in the dark about how power manifests itself in our countries, in our regions, in our continents, globally. You will recall that, I believe it was Michael Pompeo, if I'm not mistaken, who described Julian Assange and WikiLeaks in a bid to explain why Julian and WikiLeaks must be eradicated. He described Julian and WikiLeaks as a hostile, non-state intelligence agency, which is exactly right. This is precisely what WikiLeaks is. But, you know, it's what the Guardian should be. It's what Le Monde should be. It should be what every self-regarding news outlet ought to be. A hostile, non-state intelligence agency that reveals to the many that which is happening behind closed doors, supposedly in their name, against them. Julian is very rightly hated by the establishment because he revealed power's guilty secrets. And, we must never eschew that. We must celebrate it. He is a real nightmare, public enemy number one for the establishment, for the oligarchy. And he is that because he has managed in his life to combine two remarkable achievements. One is he's a fantastic theorist of the way power spreads through opacity, through the opposite of transparency. Even before he started WikiLeaks, he was theorizing and writing very beautiful texts on how to turn the tables on Big Brother. Effectively, how to create a technological digital mirror that we turn towards the face of Big Brother, so that while Big Brother is watching us, we're watching him. And this is exactly what WikiLeaks is. So that was the theory before WikiLeaks. And then, of course, we had the practice. And, you know, the other reason why they hate him so much is because he's a brilliant technologist. You know, Julian could have been the CEO of Google. He could have been a multi-billionaire given his skills. But he has chosen, you know, to be in Belmarsh prison, to be persecuted and hounded on behalf of, you know, humanity that needs to have access to the information that is denied by an oligarchy, absolutely hell-bent on maximizing its power over the many by withholding this information. Allow me, just before I finish, because I don't want to monopolize the discussion. Look, I've watched Julian work at close quarters. You know, in one of my many visits at the Ecuadorian embassy, I remember he texted me sometime and in the middle of the night and said, "Look, you need to come over." So I got in an airplane from Athens, I flew to London, and got a taxi. I ran as quickly as I could to the Ecuadorian embassy. And he had a recording that he wanted to share with me. It was a conversation between the head of the European desk of the International Monetary Fund and other members of the International Monetary Fund, in which what they were saying was just absolute confirmation of everything that the Greek people had been suffering under the IMF program since 2010. All the things that we were saying as radicals, progressives, opponents of the IMF, they were admitting to one another. And he had this recording, and he asked me to help him deciphering what they were saying, because a lot of the terminology is apocryphal. But I watched Julian working as a dedicated journalist. You know, we were mates, we were comrades, we were friends, we were working together. He never revealed to me where that information came from, where that recording came from. And you know what? He would not have revealed it, even if his life depended on it, because he preserved his sources. He was meticulous in the way he ensured that what WikiLeaks published was accurate. He had the the ideal journalist mentality. So this is why he's hated, because he's what journalism should be. He's what an active democratic citizen should be. He's genuinely the living, breathing nightmare of the oligarchy. And that's why they are trying to kill him in Britain's Guantanamo. Now, to finish off, we must stop defending Julian. We must go on the attack. We must attack those who are killing him. Enough of defending Julian. Julian doesn't need defending anymore. We need to go on the attack, because there is a crime perpetrated against all of us, parliamentarians and non-parliamentarians, when they are trying to kill the body and the soul of Julian Assange in order to stop democracy from having a chance. We don't have democracy, but to stop democracy from even having a chance. And whenever journalists, whether it's the BBC or CNN or, you know, TV5 in France, wherever, whenever they ask us about human rights violations here, there, and everywhere, wherever, you know, the West seems to be interested in human rights, we must respond by saying, what about Julian Assange's human rights? What about the human rights of all those people that were helped by Julian Assange, and now Julian Assange, because he helped them, is being killed off on a daily basis? This is you know, whenever they say to us, oh, but, you know, Julian Assange did this and did that, we must respond by saying to them, this is the type of question one asks if one is not interested in the survival of free journalism. We must attack the framework that the BBC, The Guardian, and so on are using in order to justify and to legitimize the slow murder of Julian Assange. Solidarity, Julian.
Thank you so much, Yanis. And I think you just really clearly explained there, I mean, how much of this needs to be fought back politically as well as legally. And I think that, you know, the way you just summarized that was really, really helpful, I think, for all of us that have tuned in. I'm going to now go to Norway and the leader of, I believe, the Red Party of Norway, if I can invite to speak and say a few words maybe about what the campaigns have been like in Norway and any thoughts or any contributions in terms of the campaign going forward and maybe what we should be working on, maybe in a Europe-wide basis or beyond. I can see Bjornar Maxlist, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, but if you want to unmute yourself, and it'd be really great to hear from you. I can see Bjornar on the call, but I'm not sure if they can, if they've been able to receive my message yet. But in that case, I will go on then to the next person I had in mind to bring to speak to everybody here is from Switzerland, the Swiss Parliament, Carlo Sommaruga. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But Carlo, if you want to unmute yourself and perhaps you can tell us what's happening in your country and make some contributions.
Bonjour tout le monde, j'espère que vous m'entendez. En tout cas, depuis la Suisse, je tiens d'abord à remercier l'organisation de cette conférence parlementaire. Je pense que c'est un événement politique majeur de pouvoir mettre en réseau les parlementaires de différents pays et ensuite de voir les actions politiques qui peuvent être menées et aussi la sensibilisation et la mobilisation au sein de notre pays. Moi-même, je suis Carlo Sommaruga, je suis avocat, je suis membre du Parti socialiste suisse, je siège au Parlement fédéral depuis de nombreuses années et pour le canton de Genève et je suis actuellement conseiller aux États, c'est-à-dire je suis sénateur du canton de Genève. Je me suis engagé assez rapidement ici en Suisse en soutien à Julian Assange et j'ai eu l'occasion de le rencontrer en 2013 à l'ambassade équatorienne à Londres. Plutôt que de faire une analyse internationale sur la situation de Julian Assange, je voulais simplement vous dire quelques mots sur le mouvement de solidarité en Suisse, dès lors que de nombreuses personnes ici en Suisse, à différents niveaux, se sont engagées pour son soutien. Il y a naturellement toutes les militantes et tous les militants de la liberté d'expression et de la défense des droits de l'homme, mais aussi les militants et les militantes qui refusent les logiques de la raison d'État. Et je crois que c'est extrêmement important de le souligner, cette logique de la raison d'État qui fait que l'on cache, l'on justifie les crimes de guerre, les atrocités et la torture, et surtout qui empêche que ces actes illégaux du point de vue du droit international et du droit national soient jugés. Et naturellement, il y a tous ceux qui s'engagent dans ce sens et qui soutiennent la démarche de Julian Assange avec Wikileaks, puisque c'est un instrument extrêmement important dans la lutte contre la raison d'État et l'impunité. Il y a en Suisse aussi un réseau d'avocats et de juristes assez étendu dans tout le pays qui est mobilisé sur le cas de Julian Assange et qui agit en fonction des nécessités au niveau politique. Et ça, c'est extrêmement important puisque c'est une compétence qui peut être utile au niveau international si elle est demandée, mais surtout au niveau suisse pour ouvrir des voies si jamais il y a la volonté de venir chez nous. Et au niveau parlementaire, il y a un nombre d'élus qui sont engagés. Ils sont engagés au niveau aussi parlementaire local, parlementaire régional et fédéral. Au niveau fédéral, il y a des parlementaires qui se sont engagés depuis longtemps sur le sort de Julian Assange. Ceci dans les deux chambres, on a un système bicaméral comme aux États-Unis. L'idée de base qui est autour de cette mobilisation est que la Suisse puisse accorder un visa humanitaire à Julian Assange. Le terrain politique est quand même assez déblayé pour une telle démarche. Il y a des soutiens qui sont assez larges. D'une part, il y a la ville de Genève qui s'est, en tant que ville, mobilisée en Suisse pour pouvoir amener les autorités nationales à accorder ce visa humanitaire à Julian Assange. Il y a aussi le canton de Genève qui s'est mobilisé, non seulement le Parlement, mais aussi des membres de l'exécutif qui sont prêts à soutenir auprès des autorités fédérales l'octroi d'un permis humanitaire. Et puis, ce qui est important aussi, c'est qu'il y a le service de santé publique, l'hôpital cantonal de Genève, qui est prêt à recevoir Julian Assange pour des soins s'il vient en Suisse, si cela est nécessaire. Il y a également des contacts avec des cliniques privées qui pourraient aussi intervenir de manière plus discrète pour la prise en charge de Julian Assange s'il devait venir en Suisse. Je dirais encore qu'au niveau fédéral, il y a ce qu'on appelle chez nous la division de sécurité humaine qui s'occupe des problèmes et des questions des droits de l'homme au niveau international, qui a une oreille assez attentive sur ce dossier. C'est un segment du département fédéral des affaires étrangères et donc il s'agit là d'un signe assez encourageant. L'idée d'un permis humanitaire en Suisse qui mobilise, qui est en fait le vecteur qui permet de mobiliser au-delà des cercles politiques très engagés, c'est que c'est un instrument qui est limité dans le temps, qui peut être octroyé en vertu de dispositions qui existent déjà dans la loi et qui s'appliquent à des personnes qui ont la vie ou l'intégrité physique qui est en danger, qui est menacée. Quel que soit d'ailleurs le pays d'origine ou de provenance. L'intéressé doit se trouver vraiment dans cette situation de détresse particulière et on est vraiment dans la situation de Julian Assange. Il remplit parfaitement les conditions. L'obtention d'un visa humanitaire en Suisse est en fait un visa qui a dû durer, je dirais, limité dans le temps, mais qui permet en fait, dans un contexte relativement calme, de pouvoir réfléchir à la suite des opérations, à la suite de l'avenir de Julian Assange. Et c'est pour cela que nous estimons que dans l'hypothèse que nous attendons tous de cette libération de Julian Assange, il y ait cette possibilité de voir la Suisse comme pays d'accueil, aussi comme pays neutre, comme pays aussi qui se fait fort des droits de l'homme. Mais pour cela, il faut se battre et il faut mobiliser politiquement en Suisse. Il faut rappeler que ce système autour duquel se mobilise la classe politique, mais aussi les militants des droits de l'homme, est un système qui avait été utilisé en pleine guerre froide dans les années 60, quand Svetoslav Staline quittait l'Union soviétique pour se réfugier aux USA. En fait, elle fut accueillie en Suisse pendant 6 mois, en toute discrétion, avant qu'elle soit ensuite, elle parte ensuite pour les États-Unis. C'est un système qui est aussi appliqué pour des militants des droits de l'homme en Colombie ou dans d'autres pays qui doivent échapper à la répression de l'État ou aux escadrons de la mort. Et ça fonctionne relativement bien. Il n'y a pas de raison qu'en Suisse, on ne puisse pas appliquer à un militant de la liberté, à un combattant de la liberté comme Julian Assange, ce type de mécanisme. Je vous ai donc résumé un petit peu la mobilisation qu'il y a en Suisse, les objectifs pour participer à la solidarité avec Julian Assange et au combat qu'il mène. Et donc, je termine ici en exprimant à Julian Assange la solidarité de toutes celles et ceux qui, ici en Suisse, à tous les niveaux, s'engagent pour sa libération et s'identifient au combat qu'il a mené et qu'il continue à mener. Merci.
Thank you so much for that. That was really, really informative, actually, because I wasn't, I know maybe many others as well, not aware of what was happening there. And I think there's been a lot of work that's been done to try and bring the campaign higher on the agenda in Switzerland. So thank you for everything that you're doing there. And we look forward to staying in touch with you and working together on this campaign. I'd like to invite the next to speak, Jorge. Taiana, I believe, I hope I pronounced that correctly, but apologies if not. And I believe you are a senator from Argentina. So over to you, and we'd love to hear from you. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Ali. You pronounced very well the last name. So, well, I'm from Argentina. I am a member of the Senate of Argentina. I am the president of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So in that position, I am here, and I want to say, first of all, that we know very well the situation of Julian Assange, because we in Argentina follow very close the freedom of expression, because we have during a lot of time the control over the freedom of expression, control over the press, and dictatorship ruling. But also we know very well about Julian Assange because the work of our former embassy in the UK, that is, I think it's in the in the Zoom now, that is Alicia Castro, that was very close to the situation. She followed it. She goes to the embassy of Ecuador, and she gave all the support she could at that time to show the horrible situation in which Julian was going through. The problem with Julian Assange is that it's not just about that he's going through, expose the opacity of the international intelligence apparatus and put transparency of that. This is part of the problem. That's why we need to support the freedom of Julian Assange. And that is why it's very important that this international parliamentary meeting is trying to obtain. But the problem actually is not just Assange, the person, and the freedom of expression. The same countries and powers that prosecute Assange has no problem with the murder, for example, of journalist Khashoggi in the official facility of a friendly state. So the problem with Julian Assange is that he defies the great powers and confronts the control of these powers over the information, over the public opinion, actually over the global political system and the status quo. This is the sin of Julian Assange. And that is why we, the parliamentarians, need to make a stand and support Julian Assange, because it's not acceptable for we that express the people that the great powers and the intelligence apparatus control the information, control the public opinions, and show this capacity to punish who try to show that opacity and tend to make it more transparency. So I think that is it's time to coordinate more active the action of our parliamentarians. We can work within our societies, of course, put the issue in the political dialogue with several countries, with the United States, with UK, and with Australia, because he's a national of Australia, and be sure that in the case of Argentina, we, the parliamentarians, will work close to the idea of freedom of Julian and to fight any form of opacity and lack of transparency of the great powers intelligence apparatus. We suffer a lot from them, and we are not going to accept again, in this case, another issue another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jorge. And I think that solidarity and the campaigning work that you're doing in your country and in your parliament is so important, I think, and should never be sort of undervalued and understated, given the fact that Julian was in the embassy in the UK, and the role of parliamentarians in Latin America is going to be so crucial going forward as well. I'm going to call now next to speak Andrej Hunko from Germany, I believe, who is also a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe as well, which could be another body to try and lobby, try and bring forward the agenda higher up there as well with the campaign. So over to you, Andrej.
Thank you very much, Apsana. Yes, I'm a member of the German Parliament and of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. First of all, I would like to thank you for this so important and timely meeting, because I think now is the time to re-aware a bit about the situation of Julian Assange, because there was a lot of course, in January after the court ruling, there was a lot of awareness, and as at least in Germany, that awareness now is lacking a bit. I totally agree what most of the speakers said concerning the importance and significance of the case, not only for journalism, but as well on democracy itself, as Nils Melzer pointed out. And I just want to concentrate on what we can do as parliamentarians. So I think very important is, on the one hand, to have these, let's say, cross-party Julian Assange groups in the different parliaments. We had some good experience here in Germany, initiated by Sevim Dagdelen. This is important, I think, and as well in the international parliamentary institutions which we have. I think two are important. It's the IPU, International Parliamentary Union, and the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. Concerning the last one, we had some success last year in January, the Assembly called for the immediate release of Julian Assange, and that's different to the European Parliament, by the way. They couldn't decide on this, and we had a good statement of the Human Rights Commissioner of the Council of Europe, Dunja Mijatovic, in February last year. And this is important because the court in Strasbourg, the Human Rights Court, will probably, after the British rulings, will decide as well. And this is linked to the Council of Europe. So I think now would be the right time to establish. We had hearings last January with Nils Melzer as well, but we didn't establish some kind of continuous working group, cross-party working group. And I think we could establish such a group now. I saw some good comrades here. I saw Jeremy Corbyn, who is now as well in the Parliamentary Assembly. I saw Paul Gavan and others. So I think that would be a good idea. But I think we should really establish in the different parliaments and in the parliamentary assemblies such kind of, let's say, institutionalized working groups on the case of Julian Assange. That's my idea. Thank you very much for this meeting and for all the contributions.
Thanks so much, Andrej, for joining us. And I think it's so important what you said there. And I think establishing all of those international spaces, shared spaces to take the campaign to and bring higher up on the agenda is just going to be so crucial in this next phase as well. And it's really brilliant that we've got so many of us from all these different parts of the world to come together and share this space here today, and to provide that space to connect with each other and do so accordingly. I'm going to now ask to speak James Goodall, who is with us, I think joined us. I'm not sure where he's joined us from, but he is the former New York Times General Counsel and Vice Chairman. And obviously asked for the New York Times' right to publish the Pentagon Papers. So such crucial, amazing work. And I think it's really important, I think, to hear from yourself and perhaps hear from you as to how we can maybe take this campaign forward from your perspective. So welcome, James, and over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay,
great. Well, let me make 3 points. The first of which is somewhat parochial, and that is Julian Assange is being indicted under the Espionage Act. That act does not apply to people who are engaging in First Amendment activities as Julian Assange has been. So my very first point is that this whole proceeding, which started in the United States and is now in the UK, because the UK is going to extradite, trying to extradite Julian, is trumped up, in my opinion. And the reason I say that with some authority is that the case that was brought in the United States 50 years ago against the New York Times was also based on the Espionage Act. But by the time that case reached the Supreme Court, the United States government had decided that the Espionage Act didn't apply to publication and journalism. And I would argue that that same view still applies here, and that the charges against Julian Assange, which essentially are all based on the Espionage Act, are trumped up because the act doesn't apply. So what did the government do, which takes me to my second point in that case? It had to defend against a First Amendment violation. And of course, the New York Times won under the First Amendment. And the point I want to make here is that this is a very important case from an international viewpoint for freedom of speech, which is ensconced in the First Amendment in this country and in other constitutional provisions throughout the world. What the United States government is doing is basically trying to shut down the disclosure of the activities that it engaged in the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war and that sort of thing. And these activities do not damage national security, are important for international understanding. And I take it, obviously, that's why we are all here today. But I wanted to underline that point. Lastly, I wish to make the obvious point that Nils has stood from the very beginning, which is that we should not lose sight of the terrible way that Assange has been treated by the UK courts. He was ensconced in a glass cage, as we all probably know, in the courtroom. He's been in a COVID-infested prison. He's been not allowed out for a long, long time. And the whole treatment of Assange, just from a humanitarian point of view, has been outrageous. And anyone in the world can join in on that point of view, and does not have to be a Julian Assange fan, because generically his human rights have been really badly damaged. And so I'd like to conclude by saying that my hope is that the appeal of this case, it's been decided that Julian Assange is suicidal and cannot be extradited, will be affirmed as it goes up the UK courts and beyond, because he really deserves to be let out of prison just as a plain human being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, and it's really good to have you on here actually today. And the work that you've done is I think so vital and insightful in terms of the threats posed by the outcomes or future of this case for press freedom overall. I'm keen to open up the floor, but I know that a couple of other people might want to come back in as well. But just really focusing at this point now, how to, any thoughts, any ideas about how we can, really campaign and move forward the campaign to help free Julian. I want to just bring in very quickly, I know Peter from Australia will have some ideas. Senator Peter from Australia. So if you want to unmute yourself, and we'd be glad to hear from you and the work that you and your colleagues are doing and want to do going forward.
I think Pete has actually left the call.
Okay.
Apsana. So look, I might just give a quick update.
Yeah, Janet.
That's all right. Yeah, so I'll give a quick update as to what's happening in Australia, where there is a very strong community campaign that sadly isn't well reflected in our parliament. Although we have got a very active parliamentary friends group with led by some very focused and keen campaigners, but it's a relatively small number of the parliamentarians in the Australian Parliament. But, we do our best to keep the issue of Julian Assange very live in the Australian Parliament. As I said in my previous contributions, our government is very unsupportive, and I think the analysis by Nils earlier on as to the reasons behind that, of their collusion with the security and intelligence agencies in the UK and the US is basically behind that, and they don't want to take any action that's going to support, you know, speaking truth to power and publishing information that they are not keen on seeing published. So we are doing our best to keep on, you know, making the issue very live and be working with the community who, you know, are very keen to and very good at keeping the issue very prominent. Lots of huge amount of social media coverage, reasonable amount of mainstream media coverage when there are sort of developments or when there is something that's of great interest in the parliament that's occurred. But you know, not as much as I think there should be, given the situation of Julian being an Australian citizen and being held under such unreasonable and outrageous circumstances. With regards to, we're facing a federal election in Australia, either at the end of this year or early next year. It's actually quite a tight electoral position, so there could be a potential of a change of government. The Labor Party here in Australia has been pretty weak on their position on Assange, but they have strengthened it slightly following their national conference last month, where although they had a motion that went through conference, which was still pretty weak, but basically said that Labor believes it is now time for this long drawn out case against Julian Assange to be brought to an end. So they don't commit themselves to taking any action. They don't commit themselves to, you know, really strongly advocating on behalf of Julian, but at least that's they put a line in the sand and they feel that it's the ongoing persecution of Julian Assange should come to an end. So that's a good start. And I think an important part of the campaign here in Australia is going to be to get the Labor Party to support the calls from the community and to support us. I'm a Greens MP and the various independent MPs who have been very strong supporters of Assange.
Sorry to interrupt you, Janet. Can I just ask you just on that? I mean, how many of the Australian Labor Party parliamentarians are on board, if you like? Are you able to sort of maybe suggest a number, or is it just a broad, motion that went through the party and that's sort of where it stands?
It's a broad motion that went through the party, and they did not get much attention to it. It basically went through without debate. There wasn't a focus on it at their conference at all, but it appeared it had been negotiated beforehand. So the number of Labor MPs that speak out on behalf of Julian in the Parliament is pretty small, but there are a few strong supporters. So there's a base to work from. And as I said, there is a lot of support in the community. So I think there's the potential to really be continuing to sort of amp up the campaign. And we'll keep on doing that. But I think the potential of having a really good international alliance of parliamentarians, I think, will be a really powerful addition to our campaigning in Australia. Because obviously, with Julian being an Australian citizen, we should be leading the charge for justice for him as an Australian citizen and to end the persecution.
Thanks so much.
Could I say something?
Yes, James.
Yeah, I didn't give a report on the organization in the United States in support of Julian Assange along the lines of one we've just heard, because there isn't any. And we could count that as a personal failure of the present speaker, who has spent 10 years trying to get support. I do want to report, however, one promising event that took place about 3 weeks ago, organized by Trevor Timm, who's president of the First Amendment Foundation, and who testified in the case. He was able to get all the human rights organizations on the same page for the first time to make a complaint to the Justice Department to stop the progress of the case, because there's been a change in administration. While that seems modest by what we've just heard, it is actually a great breakthrough. And should the occasion come up for further action, we have a group now that will act, and we have a leader, Trevor, who can get them to act. But I have to tell you, even though that is good news, there is paucity of support for Julian Assange in this country.
That's really helpful to know and understand, James. And as you say, I think it's given that there hasn't been, as you say, for a really long time, much movement. I think this, although modest it may seem, is actually quite significant in the US to see that. And again, that just means it's so important for the pressure to be kept up. Can I bring in Claudia Webb, who's the Member of Parliament for Leicester East in the UK? And then I'll bring in Paul, Heike, and I can see Jeremy, you're indicating as well. I'll bring you in. And I know Alicia wants to also speak as well. So Claudia first, and then Heike, and then Paul.
Thank you, Apsana, and thank you for introducing me. My name is Claudia Webb, and I'm a Member of Parliament here in the UK, representing a seat called Leicester East. Obviously, we can be in no doubt as to what this case is really about. The charges against Julian Assange amount to a political trial to punish Assange for the United States' loss of face, really, in the wake of disclosing the disclosure of war crimes. So for the mere act of disclosing war crimes. But as we know, the charges against him should never have been brought in the first place. The charges were politically motivated, and the UK really, and the UK government should never have so willingly assisted the US in its unrelenting pursuit of Assange. As parliamentarians in the UK, we should all be doing all that we can and be concerned about the continuing imprisonment and attempted extradition of Julian Assange. He is here in Belmarsh, high security jail, as my colleagues highlighted, and he faces charges in the United States which could actually result in prison sentence of 175 years. So we know that keeping Julian in near isolation is obviously a major health risk and further a suicidal risk. The US is attempting to reverse the findings of the court, despite the judge's clear ruling that Julian's life would be at risk were he committed to the US prison system. Our role as British parliamentarians is to continuously highlight the inhumanity and unjust imprisonment of Julian on British soil in such inhumane conditions, and therefore to continue to bring this to light. For free speech groups, for journalists everywhere, this is not the end of the road, because I think it sets a terrible precedent. This case presents a very real danger to the freedom of the press. It extends the judicial reach of the US government, and it deploys the 1917 US Espionage Act, as we've heard, against a journalist for the very first time. The message that such a prosecution would inevitably send is that no journalist of any nationality, no matter where in the world they publish, is safe to publish material that the powerful does not approve. And as we know, Julian Assange believes that journalists are the agents of the people, not power. That we, the people, have a right to know about the darkest secrets of those who claim to act in our name. If the powerful lie to us, we have the right to know. That is such a powerful understanding that we have from Julian. Media and press have an obligation. Thus, our role also has to be to work hard to diversify and democratize our media and to protect the independent voice of journalists and the media. Yet in the UK, our media is not free. 5 billionaires own 80% of the UK press. 3 companies dominate 83% of national newspapers. If we include online market, just 5 companies dominate nearly 80% of the market. In terms of local media, just 5 companies own 80% of titles. The challenge for us is great in terms of protecting the authentic voice of journalism and journalists. We know that the National Union of Journalists stated that the US charges against Assange pose a great and huge threat, one that could criminalize the critical work of investigative journalists and their ability to protect their sources. The indictment seeks to criminalize what journalists are not only permitted, but ethically required to do, which is to take steps to help their sources maintain their anonymity. And therefore, our protection of journalism is critical work that we have to do in the UK. The other thing that we need to do is in terms of human rights organizations. The human rights implications of Julian's case are severe. Therefore, it's important that we continue to build our alliances with human rights organizations. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention issued a statement saying that the right of Mr. Assange to personal liberty should be restored. Massimo Moretti of Amnesty International has publicly stated that were Julian to be extradited or subjected to any other transfer to the US, Britain would be in breach of its obligations under international law. Human Rights Watch also published an article saying that the only thing standing between an Assange prosecution and a major threat to global media freedom is Britain. It is urgent that we in Britain defend the principles at risk. So as parliamentarians, our role is to continue to build our alliances with our independent human rights organizations. So the call to action for us is clear. Assange is a deeply polarizing figure, and the powerful rely on the animosity for Assange personally to effectively blind people to the dangers that this indictment poses. They're trying to hide the reality. Yet we must continue, therefore, to oppose this attempt to criminalize journalism that involves reporting on classified information. If not, this indictment could set a chilling precedent with grave implications for the functioning of our democracy. If, at the end of the day, UK parliamentarians, there were some of us here on this call today, but we have to convince our colleagues, work with our colleagues, those who believe in social justice, to understand that this is an attempt to silence all of us. The US government must drop this prosecution. The British government must review this extradition request and take urgent action to halt a process from which there can be no satisfactory outcome. No satisfactory outcome either for Julian or for the freedom of the press. Therefore, our work must continue to unify, to unite, and to have solidarity with Julian, with journalists, independent journalists, progressive journalists across not only in the UK, but across the world, and to have solidarity and unity with parliamentarians, with lawmakers across the world to highlight this repressive and oppressive situation that Julian is in and the threat it poses for all of us. Thank you, Apsana.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Really powerful there, and I think just highlights again what we need to do here as parliamentarians in the UK to do our bit as well to put on the pressure to have these charges dropped. I'm going to now ask Heike to speak. Heike Hänsel from Germany, from the German Parliament. Over to you, Heike.
Hello to all my colleagues around the world. I will be very brief. I'm member of German Parliament and member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. And since my colleague Sevim Dagdelen will speak quite soon, and she will give us a short sum up of all our activities in Parliament and outside the Parliament and so on, and how it was possible to give a real push to the whole case of Julian Assange and to have a real game changer. She will speak later on. So I would just like to refer to the idea of the IPU, which I really do appreciate very much. And I also would like to give the proposal, or to make the proposal, that we should focus on the 50th birthday of Julian on the 3rd of July. And perhaps to find some common activities in all parliaments around the world, either on this date itself or a little bit earlier, because, for example, in Germany won't be in July won't be no sessions due to holidays already. But for example, end of June, or to find some common activities where we could have a 24-hour speeches, starting in East, ending in West, and so on, to have some ideas where we could show that we are connected and we are willing to do everything together to free Julian Assange. So this would be my idea. Perhaps he can work a little bit on this, elaborate a little bit on this. What would be possible to have some common things on focusing on the 3rd of July. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think those are two really solid ideas there for everyone to take away. I think the 3rd of July as a sort of international day of action, if you like, I think is what you're suggesting, and sort of really bringing together almost like this, a symposium of people speaking from east to west, I think is really powerful there. Thank you so much. And I'll bring in next Paul, I believe, who's from Ireland. Thanks for joining us, Paul, and over to you next.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, comrades. My name is Paul Gavan. I'm a Sinn Féin senator, and I'm also a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I'm going to be brief as well. I'm just going to let you know that a group of 20 Irish MPs and senators from my own party and from a range of independent groups, broadly progressive people, had got together, and we've written to the British ambassador. Julian's issue has been raised in Parliament and will certainly be raised again. And we've also requested a meeting, if possible, with Julian. Look, it's very clear to me why Julian is going through all of this. It's because he's had the courage to speak out and expose war crimes. And we see the liberal veneer of the state stripped away. And there's a clear attempt to punish him and to show him to be as an example in case anyone else has the courage to stand up against what's happening. Look, we know a thing or two in Ireland about what happens when a state acts badly and tries to hide crimes. It's very much a part of our own history. So I just want to send greetings of solidarity. I want to assure you of our continued commitment to Julian. I want to just salute Stella. It's awful to hear what Julian is going through. It's absolutely appalling. And I do think that this is an important meeting, because I think the more we can coordinate our activities internationally would really help. And I do think, as Jeremy and others have suggested, Andrew suggested as well, using international forums like the IPU, like the Council of Europe, I think has real potential over the next couple of months. So other than that, just to say that we'll continue to work as we can for Julian's freedom, and just to issue solidarity. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul, and thanks for the work that you're doing, and your colleagues as well, in terms of putting on the pressure, because like yourselves, we have obviously also requested in the UK Parliament to see and meet Julian, and that has been rejected, but we are still putting the pressure on to make sure that there is that outlet as well for us to hear from an on-remand prisoner who should not be in Belmarsh prison, as you say, and the effects of that, which you've outlined as well. I'm going to come to next Alicia Castro, who of course was an ambassador and the ambassador when Julian sought asylum, and it'd be really great to hear from you, Alicia, and thanks for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Apsana. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very, very important meeting, comrades, at a very important moment where we have a crisis of so many sorts all together. I will speak English because I heard that the Spanish translation is having some problems. So I was ambassador of Argentina to the UK in 2012 when Julian was granted his diplomatic asylum, which is a Latin American institution that is very keen to us. And we are so sorry that Lenin Moreno, among other evil things, has abandoned Julian and handed Julian to the United States, knowing that he was going to be asked for extradition. And I met him, I think, the next day that he was in the ambassador of Ecuador. And since then I was visiting him very often. And I witnessed his not only his human conditions and his bright intelligence, his radiant intelligence, but his commitment as an investigative journalist. And he was not only never revealing his sources, but he was very obsessive on confronting the facts, on knowing and letting know only what was truth. And many times I would ask him, do you know more about this and that? Would you know more about Argentina? Would you know more about Venezuela? And he always answered to me, if I would know more, I would have published it. So he was his aim, his mission was to democratize truth and to reveal to every man and woman in the world the secrets that belong to that industrial military elite. So he's a real hero from my point of view. He's a truth hero, un héroe de la verdad, we would say in Spanish. And we have this paradox in this crucial moment of a real crisis civilizatoria, a crisis of civilization. We have this paradox that we are trying to understand how everything works in the midst of fake news. And instead, Julian Assange, that really represents truth, is in jail. So I think there's a very important issue that Stella raised this morning. It's not only a matter of press freedom, it's only a matter of sovereignty. I think that's a very interesting point of view para abordarlo, to have a different look at it. So I think that, as Yanis said, while the person that revealed to humanity or the horrors and the crimes, the war crimes, and the criminals are free, and Julian is in jail, we should point that very strongly, as we did. We belong also with Yanis and Jeremy. We belong to the Progressive International, and we put in last November a tribunal we called it the Belmarsh Tribunal. Similar to that, we try to make a mirror to that tribunal that judged the Vietnam war crimes in 1969, and it was the Sartre-Russell tribunal that was supposedly judging the criminals of Vietnam. I mean, with no power for us judges, but yes, as citizens. No, Sartre had a very remarkable words, and he said, "Who am I? Qui je suis? I am nowhere. I am no one, but I am the one who can judge the criminals." He said that for Vietnam, and I think it's the same thing that we could do regarding the Julian injustice and suffering. So I think that I've been in Parliament also for 8 years, and I appreciate very much that today we have with us the president of the Commission of Foreign Affairs in Argentine Senate that already spoke. It was my compañero Jorge Taiana. And it's also Eduardo Valdés that I hope he can speak later. And he's the president of the Foreign Affairs Commission in Parliament, in Congress. And we have another parliamentarians, and we hope that Adolfo Pérez Esquivel will join us later. But I think that one thing that we could do is to work the Julian Assange issue in the commissions in Parliament and Senate, in those commissions that are friend commissions with this or that country. So I think that particularly in the commission with the United States, Julian Assange issue is something that has to be present. And then the other thing that I think we should do is to give continuity to this parliamentarian symposium, not a one stance, but I think that we could give it some continuity. And I appreciate very much the idea of Richard Burgon. So thank you very much for having me, for inviting me. And another thing that we have to do, I'm always insisting to my friends and campaigners and to Joseph Farrell, and I think that everything that is published on Julian and everything on the internet and Twitters are in English. So I hope you can translate it to Spanish, because as you know, it's a very broad language. And of course, it's the Ecuadorian language. And of course, we are very sorry that elections in Ecuador was lost by Andrés Arauz and Rabascal, because we had some hopes there. And we will keep insisting on the Pope to give his word, because everything about Christianity is truth. Solo la verdad nos hará libres. Only the truth will make us free. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Alicia, and I think that was just amazing what you just said there. And I think absolutely, in terms of the forums that you've spoken about, that we need to apply pressure on. And you know, there really is, I feel there is hope in Latin America, and I see leaders emerging there as well that I know will help take us forward with this campaign and many others. So thank you so much for being with us. I'm now going to go to Mick Wallace, who is a member of the European Parliament, and then I will come to Jeremy Corbyn before we close for this session. So over to you, Mick, and welcome to this session.
Hello, how's it going? Thanks very much. And as you, I'm a member of the European Parliament from Ireland, and I'm very glad to be able to participate today. As a politician, it's probably my job to think of the bigger picture. And both myself and Claire Daly met Julian Assange back in 2013 in the Ecuadorian embassy. And like just about everyone here today, I'm sure we believe that what's happening to him is a great injustice. But the big picture is that this case just isn't about Assange. His individual freedom rights are very important, and we shouldn't forget that. But we have to understand that the persecution of Assange is actually an attack on all of us. We need to see what's going on with Assange as part of something much bigger, a huge effort to roll back our rights and to dismantle democracy. It didn't start in the last year or two when Assange was arrested. It didn't even start 11 years ago when the States vowed to go after him. It started probably 20 years ago. What's happened to Assange in Belmarsh is part of a process when the war on terror originally began, probably with the attack on Afghanistan. The events of 9/11 and the US reaction to it have cast a dark shadow over the world in which we live in right now. You could say that we're living in a bit of a shadow. It wasn't just the US and its allies that went to war. That'd be bad enough. They said their wars were to spread democracy, but actually the war on terror was a war on democracy. Bush and Blair used the idea of terrorism to commit an assault on civil liberties and the rule of law. Their illegal war against the Iraqi people left international law and the international system in tatters. They made a mockery out of human rights. They more or less legalized torture. They threw due process rights for terror suspects out the window. It was one thing after another. Indefinite detention without trial, extraordinary rendition, atrocities committed by the US military and its allies. illegal mass surveillance of the whole world, persecution of Muslim minorities at home, and the destruction of Muslim majorities countries abroad. They wouldn't have been able to do what they're doing to Assange now without Bush and Blair's attack on the rule of law. One of the reasons Assange's legal battle is so difficult is because the UK's extradition treaty is so mad. There's no safeguards for the rights of people accused of anything by the US. And we wonder why. Well, Blair wanted to make it easier to strip British Muslim suspects of their rights and send them to America if it suited. Assange is a victim of the same war on terror laws he did so much to oppose. The thing that has happened in the last 20 years could not have happened probably without this attack on democracy. The war in Iraq and Afghanistan were crimes against humanity. Those countries are still suffering from the consequence of those wars, and we actually visited Iraq for a week only there 2 weeks ago, and it was, I mean, it is just horrific what was done to millions of people in Iraq, and you wonder what for. They didn't even ever even end. I mean, they gave birth to new wars in Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia, Libya, and Syria. There's been a crazy death toll, millions dead, and tens of millions displaced. Some of them have tried to come here to find peace into Europe. Instead of welcoming them, we're building higher borders and try and keep them out. All of this shows that there's something really wrong with our societies. We're supposed to be democracies, but these things couldn't happen in a real democracy. In a democracy,
I'm in a conference.
Oh, okay, call me.
In a democracy, powerful people are supposed to be accountable. They're not supposed to be able to lie and cheat and murder millions of people in illegal wars and get away with it. Real democracies are not capable of cruelty on a mass scale like what we've witnessed in the last 20 years. That's why Assange is part of this story. He was on the side of the rest of us. He wanted to fix this. Assange is a journalist. Journalism is supposed to be a huge part of democracy. It's supposed to hold people to account. It's supposed to hold power to account. Journalism is supposed to expose the lies of the powerful and it's supposed to prevent things like Iraq wars from happening. But as we all know, journalists in the mainstream media didn't stop the Iraq war from happening. They didn't expose the lies. In actual fact, they were cheerleaders for it. They cheered it on, and during the war, most journalists in the mainstream media didn't do their job. They didn't tell us about the war crimes. They helped the governments write their own propaganda for us instead. During the wars, the defense ministries developed the practice of embedded journalism. They put journalists in the units with American and British troops. Most mainstream journalists on the war were just government press releases. They were part of the problem. The public never saw the reality of what was really happening. The government was able to create the impression that by 2010, the wars had been successful and the public was largely apathetic to them. But Assange and WikiLeaks they changed that, and they had an incredible impression and impact by their revelations. They did journalism the way it is supposed to be, exposing lies and holding power to account. WikiLeaks released thousands of documents on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They showed thousands of war crimes. They showed secret assassination squads conducting raids on family homes and slaughtering civilians. They showed helicopter gunships opening up and indiscriminately massacring women and children from the air. They showed the systematic use of torture by Iraqi security forces, and the Americans turned a blind eye. They revealed the location of undisclosed mass graves. They showed us how many people were really killed in the Iraq war. They showed us the prisoner records, the hundreds of people who've been kidnapped and renditioned and then left in Guantanamo Bay, and loads of them passed through Shannon Airport, which the Irish government didn't want to know and turned a blind eye to as well. But they showed us that the wars were really like, and exposed the lies and propaganda that was coming from the mainstream media. The volume of revelations was incredible, thousands of events. The incident in Isaki, north of Baghdad, where the US soldiers conducted a revenge attack on a village, forcing dozens of women and children as young as 5 to get down on their knees inside their house and then shooting them all in the back of the head. I mean, these soldiers who were now war criminals then called in an airstrike to destroy the evidence. I mean, how bad? I mean, when WikiLeaks documents on this act of savagery was published, the majority in the Iraq Parliament voted to suspend immunity for US troops. This eventually forced Obama to withdraw US troops from Iraq in 2011. I mean, WikiLeaks did more in 2010 than almost anyone else in Western world to stop the war on terror, to stand up for its victims, and to hold the criminals responsible for it accountable. The Afghanistan and Iraqi files changed the whole story of those wars. For the first time in years, the public could see what was going on, and opposition to the wars began to go up again. We wouldn't have this without Assange. He did what journalists are supposed to do. He acted as people are supposed to do in a democracy. That's why he's been punished. It's nothing to do with law. If they couldn't throw these charges at him, they'd have found other ones. It's not about law, it's about power. He stood up to power, and everyone saw that. So we're trying to crush him. And it's not just to punish him personally. It's a display. It's a show to everyone that this is what happened to you if you stand up to power. It's one of the reasons the court case last September was so powerful. The evidence that was heard showed clearly that this isn't a case about what Assange did or didn't do. This case is about whether we live in a democracy. This is why the ministry was blocking people getting into the court. This is why the mainstream media is ignoring this case. They don't want anyone to see what this case is really about. Look, I mean, I'll finish with Noam Chomsky's witness statement. I mean, I believe this statement is a very important historical document. It's about what I've been talking about, the bigger picture. The fact that it has been written at all shows how bad things have become. Someday, when all this Julian Assange is free, children in school will read this statement and understand what it was all about. All of the mainstream media smears will be forgotten about, and everyone will see clearly that Assange was the victim of a terrible injustice. Noam Chomsky wrote, in my view, Julian Assange, in courageously upholding political beliefs that most of us profess to share, has performed an enormous service to all the people in the world who treasure the values of freedom and democracy, and who therefore demand the right to know what their elected representatives are doing. His actions, in turn, have led him to be treated in a cruel and intolerable manner. Listen, any journalist out there who pretends to even have an interest in democracy, if you ignore the case of Julian Assange, any lip service to democracy is a load of bollocks. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Mick, and that was really powerful. And absolutely, as you say, you know, we have to look at the UK-US extradition treaty and look at it in terms of why it was brought about, when, and of course, I'll never forget the rendition flights and all those things that happened in the post 9/11 climate to persecute and to target the Muslim community in particular in the UK with a number of policies. I'm very conscious of time. Before we hand over for the next session, I'm just going to come back to Jeremy, who's been waiting patiently to come back on a few points, and then I will hand over for the next session. Over to you, Jeremy.
Apsana, thank you very much. I will be very brief because I did speak at the beginning of the session. What we're faced with is really sort of two areas of campaigning. Julian exposed what the US in particular, but other countries as well, were doing all around the world, as others have pointed out, on torture, on extraordinary rendition, on so many other things. And so it is important that we don't get totally concentrating only on the process, but also on the political message, because an awful lot of people around the world simply don't understand the importance of Julian's work in exposing all of that horrible stuff about foreign policy and what it really means. And if it's not exposed effectively, then it will be repeated over and over again. I'm speaking at the Stop the War Coalition this afternoon, and will obviously continue our calls for support for Julian Assange. Secondly, I think Heike's proposal, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, of a global conversation is a really important one, a sort of 24-hour speak out in support of Julian from people all around the world would be really, really valuable, because that would help to give it publicity, help to give it some real strength. And we could ask all of the alternative media channels to run it continuously. I'm sure many of them would, but also that would in turn force a lot of the mainstream media to take seriously this issue, because I continue to be shocked and appalled appalled at the failure, the complete failure of the British media to adequately report what's happened to Julian, the injustice surrounding it, or how wrong the government's position is. I mean, whilst they have so far said the case is going to be heard again in court, they could quite easily say they're simply not going to agree to his removal to the USA. And so I think the role of the British media in this has been appalling, in particular the failure of the Guardian and the BBC to adequately report what's going on here. Last point is this about international institutions and building stuff up. I noticed my friend Pat Gavan and others were on the call today. We're all members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which meets next week, virtually and physically in Strasbourg, physically and virtually, obviously, wherever we happen to be. I don't know, but Pat may have an idea on this, if there's some way that we can get it on the agenda next week and at least try and get some statements of support for him, because it's a good opportunity to do that. And so parliamentarians around the world have a huge role to play, but above all, it's about making the campaign big, open, popular, and fully understood around the world that Julian has told us the truth about what the viciousness of the war on terror was all about.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. I have nothing more to add. I think you're absolutely right there in terms of those actions, and I think that statement as well for PACE meeting next week, I think is going to be quite important, and it's really good that we've got a lot of people here that are members of that body that can take that forward, and let's follow that up after this meeting. I can see that there are a couple of new hands up and have been in the last few minutes, but I'm not going to be able to take them in this session, so I'm going to hand over now to Tim Dawson, who's going to be leading and chairing the next session. I'm sure he will bring you all in that discussion. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll still be here and I'll be listening to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Apsana. Sorry, I hadn't quite expected the segue to work like that. But thank you all for still being here. I'll keep my introduction as brief as possible, because I think the more voices that we get in, the better. My name is Tim Dawson. I'm a member of the executive of the National Union of Journalists in Britain and Ireland. I've been involved in campaigning around Julian Assange's attempted extradition for some considerable time now. The hope is that in this session, we can start to think about how we can take the campaign forward, and perhaps how we can broaden it out to think about some of the wider issues of transparency, of media freedom and accountability. I'm joined by a very distinguished panel, and I'll first ask Adolfo Pérez Esquivel to contribute. He's an artist by trade, but has been a central figure in Argentinian progressive forces for at least half a century, as well as continuing to produce remarkable art and having been a very active member of the Artists for Assange group. So, Adolfo, are you with us? Well, perhaps he isn't, and we could come to him a little later. Well, perhaps in that case, I could invite Sevim Dagdelen to make her.
Adolfo.
Sorry.
Está Adolfo.
Adolfo. Well, let's please make your contribution. Perhaps he needs to unmute himself. Forgive me, I thought we might have lost you. Please, your contribution, Adolfo.
A ver.
We'd love to hear from you, Adolfo. Can you hear me?
Acá estoy.
I'm worrying that perhaps you can't hear me. Can everybody else hear me?
Yes, we can. Adolfo,
excellent.
comienza a hablar. Jorge te habla. Creo que está esperando que comiences.
Great.
Perdón, ¿quieren que comience yo en este momento?
Sí, sí.
Bueno,
yes.
I speak Spanish.
Okay.
En primer lugar, saludo a todos y todas. Y ya de lo de Julian Assange no voy a repetir lo que ya vienen diciendo y que conocemos. Simplemente quiero hacer un llamado a la justicia británica, directamente al gobierno también británico, sobre la injusticia de tener a Julian Assange preso en una cárcel de máxima seguridad y reclamar su libertad. Creo que esto es lo fundamental. Hay una persecución política del gobierno de los Estados Unidos sobre Julian Assange cuando da a conocer las atrocidades cometidas por el gobierno de los Estados Unidos en distintos países. Esto fue el detonante de la grave situación que hoy está pasando Julián. Y creo que lo que podemos hacer es insistir en su pronta libertad, primero por su salud, su situación psíquica, pero también por un Estado de Derecho. No sé por qué no interviene aquí las Naciones Unidas. La Organización de los Estados Americanos, no sé, creo que no tiene incumbencia en esto, pero sí las Naciones Unidas y la Comisión de Derechos Humanos tendría que intervenir para pedir su inmediata libertad. Creo que esto es lo fundamental, el eje de que es imposible y es un llamado de atención también que Estados Unidos trata de impedir la libertad de información, la libertad de prensa, de condicionar a aquellos que se atreven a denunciar las atrocidades cometidas por los Estados Unidos en diversos países. La información que dio Julian Assange es una información que ayuda a comprender cuál es la situación real que estamos viviendo. Y hay que parar esto, la persecución política a la libertad de prensa. Es un llamado de atención donde nadie se va a querer levantar la voz contra las injusticias que cometen las grandes potencias como Estados Unidos. Y en este caso, bueno, la justicia británica tuvo una medida, digamos, inteligente de no darle la extradición a los Estados Unidos, donde sería condenado a 175 años de prisión, es decir, condenarlo a muerte directamente. Entonces, lo que podemos hacer es ver cuáles pueden ser las políticas a seguir para lograr su pronta liberación. Lo otro, ustedes lo conocen mejor que yo, lo he visitado a Julian Assange en la embajada de Ecuador cuando estaba como refugiado político, y después lamentablemente la actitud de Lenín Moreno de cancelar esto y que lo tome preso el gobierno británico. Es una injusticia que continúe en estas condiciones y haremos todos los esfuerzos, todo lo posible para que la justicia británica lo libere cuanto antes. Es esto lo que puedo compartir con ustedes en este momento.
Adolfo, thank you very much for that. It's a great pleasure to hear from you. There'll be a chance, obviously, to debate these points, albeit quite briefly when we've heard from our speakers. If I could now call on Sevim Dagdelen, who's the deputy leader of Die Linke, the German left party in the Bundestag, again, a long-time supporter of the Assange case, and one from whom I'm keen to hear. Are you here with us, Sevim?
Yeah, I am, Tim. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
First of all, my name is Sevim Dagdelen. I'm a member of the German Bundestag since 2005, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the head of the working group of the Foreign Affairs for the left party, the Die Linke in the German Bundestag. And I have met personally Julian Assange 2012 in September 2012 as the first MP ever who has visited him that time in the Ecuadorian embassy. And on the day he was arrested, I was on the way to London because I had a permission to visit him again. I mean, I was there before as well, but this was a shocking moment as well. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak at the closing panel of this symposium. And I very much hope that our discussion today will generate greater international pressure, and that together we will secure Julian Assange's release and defend the freedom of the press. I have to say it's up to the new US President Joe Biden to put an end to the persecution of Julian Assange once and for all, and to drop the espionage charges against the journalist and founder of WikiLeaks. Joe Biden should stop following in Donald Trump's footsteps here in Beijing war against the freedom of the press in investigative journalism. And it is important from my point of view to bring the campaign for Julian Assange's freedom to the US now. That is where the key decisions will be taken. And our objective must be to create a broad-based movement. We want and need widespread support from the most diverse political spectrums and political parties. Our core message has always been that in defending Julian Assange, we are defending the freedom of press and our freedom itself by defending the freedom of Julian Assange. Julian must be released without delay on health grounds and also for reasons pertaining the rule of law. And with this core belief, we are underscoring our solidarity with Julian and the German Bundestag. With this core belief, we have managed to bring about a sea change in public opinion, as well as in politics and the media in the recent years in Germany, placing solidarity with Julian in Germany on a broad-based footing. So what have we done specifically? What have we achieved and how? It was with this in mind that the left unveiled the sculptures Anything to Say with the artist Davide Dormino in front of the Brandenburg Gate and opposite to the US Embassy in Berlin in November 2019, in conjunction with a press conference and subsequently a public hearing in the German parliament entitled Media Under Fire, the campaign against WikiLeaks and investigative journalism. UN Special Reporter on Torture Nils Melzer, WikiLeaks Editor-in-Chief Christian Hafson, Reporters Without Borders, the Media Union, Verdi, and investigative journalists from leading German media outlets who had collaborated with Julian Assange on the WikiLeaks revelations were invited to attend as experts. And with Nils Melzer's reports, we managed on the one hand to place the dire impact of Julian Assange years of isolation on his health on the agenda in the German parliament for the first time. And besides this, we also emphasize the fundamental importance of the case. Probably you know about him, John Goetz, who worked for the news magazine Der Spiegel at the time, emphasized that if Julian Assange is convicted for these revelations, then John Goetz himself could, or indeed should, also be put on trial, as well as everyone else, for example, The Guardian, The New York Times, El País, and Le Monde, who assessed and reported on the Afghanistan war diaries with a team of WikiLeaks. So the hearing in the German parliament was a game changer at the end of 2019. The smear campaign against Julian Assange with the rape allegations fabricated by the Swedish judiciary began to lose traction. Nils Melzer has done genuinely outstanding work here with these reports. And the hearing paved the way in Germany for a joint declaration of solidarity with Julian Assange by over 130 prominent figures from politics, academics, culture in the run-up to the start of the trial in London in February 2020. Initiated in large part by the well-known investigative journalist Günter Wallraff, the petition included former Vice Chancellor and Minister of Foreign Affairs Sigmar Gabriel from the Labour Party, former Interior Minister Gerhard Baum from the Liberals, former Justice Minister Hertha Däubler-Gmelin from the Social Democrats, as well as the German Penn Center and Nobel Prize winner for literature Elfriede Jelinek, who called for Assange's immediate release from the British extradition custody on medical as well as rule of law grounds. And the petition had been published as a full page in one of Germany's leading daily newspapers, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, as well as in the weekly Der Freitag, and together with a joint press conference in Berlin, it gave rise to a broad-based and lasting media response. And with this appeal for solidarity focused on the lowest common denominator, on the question of Assange's humanity and health, it was also possible to enlist celebrities as contacts and interview partners for the media in the long term. And it was also possible to get further points of contact from various political camps and social sectors on board who were requested to make statements in the course of the extradition process and to evaluate the verdict reached, or who were also invited as speakers at the many newly formed solidarity groups with Julian Assange in numerous cities all around Germany. And as I have already emphasized, it is really important. In fact, it is actually vital to promote solidarity with Julian on a broad basis and to make this less of a niche issue. In this respect, I'm particularly delighted that there is now a cross-party working group in the German Bundestag called Free Julian Assange, which comprises members from all democratic parliamentary groups, from conservatives to the left wing. And Margit Stump, my colleague from the Greens, the MP and member of this working group, is also attending this symposium, and Heike Hänsel, Doris Achel, and many others, and which has spoken out in public about this working group, about the case time and again, and is also endeavoring to work behind the scenes on this issue to find a diplomatic solution in this respect. And the importance of defending freedom of the press and protecting whistleblowers is demonstrated by the many inquiries and requests for support that have since reached out parliamentary working group from other whistleblowers as well. So the NATO member and until recently European Union member state, the United Kingdom, must not be allowed to get away with the blatant injustice against Julian Assange. Julian's extradition will ultimately be decided at the political level. It's not a judicial thing, only a judicial. It will be decided at the political level. That is why I welcome the fact that we as parliamentarians are coming together here around the world to see we can achieve not only nationally, but also globally. I believe that there are 5 important points here that we can and should focus on. First, we must denounce the arbitrary nature of Julian Assange's detention at the British maximum security prison at the international level and across the board. We should agree with the human rights organization Amnesty International's assessment that Julian Assange should not have been detained in the first place during the decision-making process on the US extradition request. And in this respect, it is a scandal that despite the verdict reached in January, he is still serving his sentence at Belmarsh instead of being with his family. We must keep on emphasizing the humanitarian aspects of this case. Second, another key priority is for us to work ideally together to ensure that there is a large, broad-based solidarity movement in the US for securing Julian Assange's release, consisting of stakeholders from politics, the media, art and culture. And I have to say, I cannot see why it shouldn't be possible in the land of opportunity to show solidarity for a political prisoner. We have to look for and find supporters in the US among the parliamentarians who will work with us to get the US to drop the lawsuit. And I propose that we travel to the US together and hold talks directly in the region at all conceivable levels. Third, the Grand Council of the Swiss Canton of Geneva, one of our colleagues talked about it, passed a motion in February 2020 calling on the Swiss government to grant Julian Assange a humanitarian visa. I propose that we launch efforts to push for a humanitarian visa in many other cities and countries worldwide. Fourth, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe called on the 47 member states in early 2020, as my colleague Andrej Hunko said, to push for Julian Assange's immediate release and oppose the extradition to the US. I propose, like as Jeremy Corbyn did today, and I'm very glad that he said, I propose that we also bring the case before the Interparliamentary Union. And it's an umbrella organization for parliamentarians worldwide to adopt a cross-party and non-partisan resolution supporting Julian Assange's release. And the fifth and last proposal is, given that extraditions are always a political decision, since they have to be enforced by the government at the end of the day, pressure on politicians and the government in the UK not to extradite Julian must be kept up. We must therefore canvass even greater support from the UK Parliament, a non-partisan. The continued detentions of Julian Assange at the heart of Europe and his ongoing persecution by the Biden administration are nothing less than a disgrace and a legal scandal. And it is impossible to overstate or labor this point too much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sevim. That's a really interesting contribution. I'm really interested in this whole concept of how do we make it a broader campaign. One of the issues I've had campaigning slightly is that there are some people who when a newcomer comes to the campaign and says, well, I've finally been persuaded of the case of Julian Assange, there are some within the campaign who want to attack them and say, why weren't you here last year? Why weren't you here the year before that? Whereas I think we should be saying, however long it's taken you to come to the case, you're welcome aboard and we need your voice and we need your help. We are very short of time, so I propose a slightly amended to our running order. I've been asked to take Oscar Parielli and Eduardo Valdez, and I propose to take them now, and then we'll end with Richard Burgon, if that's okay with you colleagues. Oscar, your contribution, please, but do please keep it reasonably brief because we do have to finish by 3 o'clock UK time.
Bueno, buenos días a todos, a todas. Hablo en mi idioma, español, no hablo inglés. Y lamentablemente lo único que escuché recién de Tim fue mi nombre, porque la traducción en español se había cortado, no sé qué es lo que había ocurrido. Así que bueno, espero que todos puedan entender y que haya traducción al inglés para todos de lo que brevemente voy a expresar. En primer lugar, agradecer la invitación desde ya. Con mucho gusto estoy aquí acompañando a Julian Assange, a quien conocí por una gestión de la ex embajadora de la Argentina en Inglaterra, Alicia Castro, en el año 2016, que lo visitamos en su lugar en asilo político en la Embajada de Ecuador en Inglaterra, y la verdad que conocí un hombre diferente, distinto, un hombre que supera la media de la inteligencia, por lo menos de lo que yo conozco, y creo que es una de esas personas que en los siglos se destacan y sin duda que va a ser su mente, su inteligencia, su capacidad, su convicción y su fortaleza va a dejar marcado al siglo XXI lo que ha sido su impronta, ¿no? Y la acción que ha desarrollado en favor de la justicia y la verdad en el mundo. Decirles que yo soy senador nacional en la Argentina por mi provincia, Neuquén, y formo parte obviamente del Frente de Todos, este frente político que conformó la expresidenta Cristina Kirchner y que hoy está gobernando en la Argentina con la presidencia de Alberto Fernández y la vicepresidencia de Cristina Kirchner, y que después de 4 años de un gobierno neoliberal muy de derecha hemos vuelto al poder en la Argentina con las dificultades obviamente que todos imaginarán producto de los 4 años anteriores y de esta pandemia que tenemos. La verdad que cuando uno piensa en Julian Assange, por lo menos a nosotros los que somos latinoamericanos y que hemos sufrido las atrocidades, las vejaciones, los atropellos, las violaciones de todo tipo por parte de los imperios, en su momento el imperio inglés, luego el imperio americano, lo que hemos sufrido, el apoyo a los golpes de Estado en nuestros pueblos en América Latina y bueno, todo lo que sufrimos, como también vimos después por parte de Estados Unidos, Inglaterra y otros imperios, las vejaciones a los derechos humanos que hicieron con las guerras que llevaron adelante desde Vietnam, Camboya, bueno, todo lo que ya conocemos. Yo quiero hacer simplemente una sugerencia. A mí me parece que el caso Julian Assange no hay que plantearlo solamente como como una afrenta a la libertad de prensa, a la libertad de opinión. A mí me parece que hay que decir con todas las letras que estamos ante una de las acciones de vejaciones a la condición humana más torpes y más brutas de este siglo. Yo creo que la situación de Julian Assange no se va a cambiar por lo que podamos hacer los parlamentarios. Yo creo que simplemente si logramos influir en la opinión pública americana y en la opinión pública inglesa y demostrar claramente lo que están haciendo con este hombre los poderes fácticos y los gobiernos de Estados Unidos y de Inglaterra, vamos a poder cambiar esa postura. Y en ese sentido creo que hay que ser muy duro. Acá se mencionaba hace un rato cómo se lo desprestigió inventando una supuesta denuncia por violaciones sexuales o por ataques sexuales a Julian Assange para destruirlo ante la opinión pública. Yo creo que tenemos que decir con todas las letras que hoy Julian Assange está en la hoguera, lo están quemando vivo como se quemaba en la hoguera en algunas épocas de la historia de la humanidad, o se le está aplicando la guillotina, se lo está matando. Son criminales los que están hoy convalidando la situación de detención que tiene Julian Assange, e insistir en la opinión pública, precisamente de estos países, de Inglaterra, Estados Unidos, que sus gobiernos, que se proclaman y sus funcionarios muchas veces defensores de la democracia, las instituciones, las libertades, están hoy llevando adelante no solamente una tortura, ¿no?, sino una muerte al estilo precisamente de esas que en alguna época tuvo que lamentar la historia de la humanidad por la violencia y la barbaridad en la que la llevaron adelante. A mí me parece que nosotros todos, y obviamente son aquellos que pertenecen a los parlamentos europeos de América, de Inglaterra, Estados Unidos, los que más posibilidades tienen de hacerlo. Nosotros podemos hacerlo desde nuestro lugar, desde aquí, desde el sur, desde América, desde la Argentina, pero lo que tenemos que poner es precisamente esto, ser muy concretos y muy precisos en el sentido de decir que acá se está vejando, se está matando, se está torturando, se está quemando en la hoguera, se está guillotinando a un ser humano, a una persona, por no haberse sometido a los designios del poder económico, político, financiero y militar del mundo. y lograr que la opinión pública de esos países comience a verlo a Julian Assange de esa manera. Me parece que esa va a ser, creo, ¿no?, una manera de que podamos ir torciendo la voluntad de quienes tienen que decir, y que en definitiva será algún juez, algún fiscal, pero que va a ejecutar las órdenes que le impartan desde arriba. Por esto, bueno, agradecer nuevamente la invitación, agradecer a Alicia, la verdad que fue una experiencia que recuerdo todo minuto de esa larga conversación que tuve con Julian Assange por más de 4 horas y donde realmente conocí a una mente diferente, distinta, y creo que por ser eso hoy está siendo víctima de esta feroz vejación a la cual la someten los poderes económicos de Estados Unidos e Inglaterra fundamentalmente. Muchas gracias.
Oscar, may I interrupt you? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that contribution. I've had confused my information slightly. Can I ask Richard Burgon to speak now, because I appreciate he has to go to another meeting, which I hadn't realised previously. Richard is the MP for Leeds East in the United Kingdom, and again is a long-time supporter of Julian's, with whom I've certainly shared platforms in the past. Richard.
Thanks very much, Tim. And you've already heard from me once today, so I won't speak for very long. I just wanted to say some of the things that we have done in the British Parliament before I have to leave. Firstly, we've convened a cross-party working group with politicians from across the political spectrum, and I think this is important. There are a broad range of reasons why some people believe that Julian Assange should not be extradited to the United States. It's important that everyone is brought together. Secondly, we've been raising the issue with parliamentary questions and a parliamentary motion, taking up a range of issues, press freedom, the issue of extradition treaties, etc. And thirdly and finally, from me, we've been trying to get a meeting between Julian Assange and a group of MPs from the UK Parliament. Now, we've been treated disgracefully on this, and obviously Julian's been treated disgracefully on this, using bureaucratic obstacles and procedures and treating members of Parliament as if they shouldn't be interested in this matter. And I say this to the UK government. What have you got to hide? Why won't you allow members of Parliament to talk to Julian Assange? Julian Assange is a remand prisoner charged with no crime and who the courts say should not be extradited. So why can't we, as members of Parliament, be allowed to meet with him? And with regards to what we do next, I believe that we need to coordinate between parliamentarians in as many countries as possible, as we've done today, providing regular information to politicians, coordinating demands, and focusing especially on the Biden administration, using whatever influence we have to ensure that Julian Assange is freed. And I can also commit that I will also convene a quarterly international meeting of parliamentarians, lawmakers from around the world on this very important issue. I think it's important that we commit to meeting quarterly until this matter is resolved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Well, let's hope that in 3 months' time, Julian Assange has actually been released, and maybe the focus of that meeting can be something slightly different, but that's certainly a very helpful prospect. Okay, well, I think this is going to be our last speaker, but can I invite Eduardo to make his contribution, and I think then we will need to wrap up. You need to unmute yourself, Eduardo.
Sí, ¿me escucha?
Yes, I can.
Bueno, primero, muchas gracias por participar de esta actividad. Gracias a Alicia Castro, como a todos los argentinos que permanentemente nos tiene presente que hay que luchar y luchar por la libertad de Julian Assange. Me consta que Alicia perfora las fronteras permanentemente para ver cuándo suma una voz más poderosa para poder lograr la libertad de Julian Assange. Entonces, a mí se me ocurría, nosotros tenemos un grupo que es muy importante en América Latina, que nos solemos reunir periódicamente, en donde hay 13 expresidentes y algún presidente actual, hay cerca de 12 cancilleres de América Latina, está el presidente Lula, la presidenta Dilma Rousseff, la vicepresidenta Cristina Kirchner, acá mismo está el canciller Taiana, está el canciller Celso Amorín de Brasil, Adolfo Pérez Esquivel participa, Premio Nobel de la Paz, activamente. Entonces, a mí se me ocurría una idea que era ver si generábamos un texto en común con la representatividad de los parlamentos globales que hay en este lugar, sobre todo de Europa, y con el Parlamento andino más el Parlamento del Sur, el Parlasur, y las distintas representaciones, a ver si lo que podemos hacer es un texto que sea conmocionante de muchos dirigentes del mundo, con representación, que piden la libertad de Julian Assange, primero con un texto y después con un zoom global de todas esas personas, y quizás se va generando una movida por la libertad de Julian Assange. Es una idea, la dejo ahí y estamos dispuestos a instrumentarla. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Well, I think in terms of taking particular ideas forward, then probably the kind of the behind the scenes organization that has brought this meeting together is probably the way in which to draw some of these threads and to take some of those forwards, perhaps then also reflecting through Richard Burgon's suggestion of quarterly meetings, which seems like an excellent one. I do have to close this meeting, for which I apologize, colleagues. I sense that there is more to say and that there are more voices that would like to be heard. However, my instructions are that before we get to 3 o'clock, we have already overrun and we must come to a conclusion. I feel a very undistinguished voice, really, to be addressing you and to saying the final words. But if I could say, as a working journalist, which is what I am, it does give me enormous heart to know that so many parliamentarians from all over the world take such a critical issue of media freedom so seriously. And while I have in dark moments thought of the consequences of Julian Assange being tried in the United States and the impact that that would have on quality journalism all over the world, the fact that so many important parliamentarians are engaged on this issue, clearly we've not come to a resolution, Julian is still in prison, but just the thought that so many parliamentarians are engaged on this issue gives me great heart that free speech and free expression has powerful defenders around the world. And I'm sure if we continue to work together, then we can get to the point for which we're all hoping, the freedom of Julian Assange and the enshrining all over the world in defences for free speech and free expression. So, colleagues, thank you very much indeed. I hope you enjoy, whether it's the morning, the afternoon, or the middle of the day where you are. Thank you very much for participating. And I will call us to order and say, at least in London, good afternoon.
Thank you.